1 year after a magical season for the Vanderbilt Commodores, it's back as business as usual for the Commodores in 2025. Your core four is back. Diego Pavia, Junior Sherrill, Cedric Alexander, and Eli Stowers returning for what should be an even better Vanderbilt offense in 2025. But are expectations higher for Vandy this year? We'll find out and see. Hello, everyone. I'm Lucas Hill. This is SEC Live at the Voice of College Football. I'm your host, as always, Lucas Hill. Follow me on X at Lucas_Hill23. Today, we're previewing the Vanderbilt Commodores. Joining me is none other Billy Derrick. You can check him out on the George Plaster Show on 94.9 The Fan, weekdays from 3 to 5 Central. Also, but most importantly, covering Vanderbilt football over at Vandy247. Billy, good to have you on, man. How are you today?
I'm good, Lucas. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely, brother. Look, last year, obviously, everybody knows it's Vanderbilt, same old Vanderbilt. Clark Lea is going to be gone at the end of the year. Boom, you bomb it out in the transfer portal. You get arguably the entire staff from New Mexico State. Jerry Kills in the offense as a consultant. You get Tim Beck in. You get Diego Pavia in. You get Eli Stowers. Talk to me about last year's recruiting class and how much of an impact that made at the end of the year. With everybody knows what happened, but I think just outside of everybody knows about Pavia. Everybody knows about Tim Beck. Talk to me about the outside of what people missed out on, because everybody knows about Pavia at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it all started with that Virginia Tech game. People realized Pavia is a for real type player and is going to really make some noise. But a lot of people forget about a guy like Brandon Fontenette, who came over from TCU, just a stud hybrid position type guy. Played a little safety, kind of that mix between a safety and a linebacker, and made a ton of plays in that Virginia Tech game. So there were a few guys out of the portal that Vanderbilt got that made some big time impacts early in the season. Zaylen Wood was another guy who transferred from MTSU after their coaching change and had some other looks elsewhere, but wanted to come to Vanderbilt. He ended up getting hurt early in the season. That was another player that could have made more of an impact if he would have stayed healthy, and I expect a lot from him this season. You mentioned Eli Stowers. Of course, you can't talk about what Vanderbilt did last year without Eli Stowers. Just a guy that, look, he started as a quarterback at New Mexico State. Honestly, before that at A&M, he was a recruit, a big-time recruit at A&M, went to New Mexico State and was a quarterback, was battling it out with Pavia. And obviously, Pavia earned the job, but Stowers ended up switching to tight end. So he was a huge part last season. There's some other guys defensively that came over but didn't play last year. Marlon Jones from Eastern Washington was a guy that didn't play last year. You had another guy, Mark Davis, who suffered an injury, didn't play last year. Looking forward to seeing what they can do. And on the offensive line, they bring in a Stephen Lasoya from Mississippi State, who made a big time impact. So these are guys, as you asked, that look, are unheralded. But it was about the team last year. Yeah, Pavia was a huge part of it. But you mentioned Tim Beck and Jerry Kill. I thought Jerry Kill was a huge part of it as well. But there were other guys that they had to bring in to continue to change the culture. I think Brandon Fontenette is absolutely one of those guys. On offense, look, wasn't a portal guy, but AJ Newberry on offense was another kid that made some plays in some big moments. And so there was a lot of guys that stepped up in huge moments for this team last season that not a lot of people talk about. And honestly, I look at Fontenette as one of those guys, and they had to go dip into the portal last season, and they poured a lot of money into their NIL, and they figured that's what was going to take the next step for them, dipping into the portal and realizing that NIL, the portal, can be used as an advantage, as a benefit to Vanderbilt's program.
Do you think there's been more boosters that have invested into the program after last year?
Yes. Yeah. I think honestly, you go back to before last season, we had heard that Vanderbilt had really gone out and asked for the funds and specifically with the football program, right? And as the head coach, Clark Lea did that. The GM Barton Simmons did that, and Earl Bennett's the guy that helps manage a lot of the NIL deals as well. The former Vanderbilt wide receiver, he helped do that. They had a tough realization before last season, and I know there were some tough conversations within the facility of where do we go from here? Like, where do we go in this day and age of NIL and the portal and basically pay for play? They got the game. they got in the game and they reached out and they Clark became a little bit of a fundraiser, but he had a lot of people around him that really helped that out. So I think more so than right now, yeah, I think last season helped a lot. But I even go back to before last season where their push for NIL and starting to pay players more, that that really helped them out. And I think, I mean, it's hard to deny the buzz they have right now, especially going back to the win over Alabama. I know the season didn't end the way a lot of people wanted it to, but they did win the Birmingham Bowl and ended the season on a high note. So yeah, I think absolutely they got to keep it going though. I think that's when you'll really start to see some more money being flown into the program.
You know, we talked about the portal, and everybody's going to talk about these big names that are at Vandy right now, and from these big schools, from your SECs or your lower tier G6 schools. There's a guy from D2 and Trey Richardson that I think a lot of people need to start paying attention to. I think he fits in really well with the Tim Beck system. The Tim Beck system, in my opinion, has just been about forget the position that you play. You're an athlete at this point. You're going to play in all parts of the field, whether you're a receiver or a back. You're going to be an integral part of this offense. I think Richardson brings that dynamic factor as not only a kick returner, but also in the receiving game and the rush game, of course, as well. Had just under 1,500 yards of total offense over at Washburn College. What have you seen from him from the summer and dating back to the spring?
Well, I went to some spring practices. I didn't. We don't get to see a ton from the summer. I heard some good things about him throughout the summer. I mean, we actually talked to Pavia today after fall camp, and Pavia said that, man, he complimented him. He's a burner, and he's a guy that can take the top off the defense. And that's the type of mold that Vanderbilt looks at typically. They're not going to go, especially with this offense. You mentioned the Tim Beck offense. Receivers are important, but this isn't an offense where you got to have 2 to 3 really good receivers to make it work. You just need 3 to 4 guys that can make big plays when you need it and make a big catch. I look at a Richie Hoskins, a guy that is not a standout type player. I don't even know if he would start on any other SEC team. He had a really big 25-yard touchdown against Kentucky last year on a post route, and it was more of an out route corner of the end zone. And it's plays like that Vanderbilt has to continue to make. Junior Sherrill, of course, too. But yeah, Trey Richardson, I think, can make a lot of plays. Vanderbilt has to have some more players that take the top off the defense because with Pavia's style and how much they like to run him, you've got to be able to spread the field more and create that space for Pavia, or else players, defensive players will load the box. Coaches obviously will be loading the box more this season. So yeah, you got to have a guy like Trey Richardson. They got some other guys like Trey in that mold that I think will have some success this year, or at least have opportunities to have some success. But yeah, that's the type of player they want, and I think he can make an impact. I've seen him a little bit in fall camp so far, and he's really fast, man. He's probably the fastest player on the team. He's not very big, and he's maybe not the most physical player. He's got to probably continue to improve on the blocking side of things, because if you're a receiver and you can't block inside this Vanderbilt offense, you're not going to play. So that's a big point of emphasis for him. He's going to have to improve his blocking, but absolutely, I think he's a guy that all goes well for this team this season. He's going to be a part of their success.
And that's why I mentioned the fact that you mentioned about that you don't need 3 to 4 receivers to make plays. That's where I say the athlete label comes in, and especially with this offense. So Billy, I called this last year in April of 24. I put out an article on SEC Unfiltered. I can't find it now. I don't know whether it got taken down or it's archived. But I said this. I said Diego Pavia was going to be the most exciting player that people are not going to hear about. I got the second part wrong, but I was pretty much right on what people needed to see. I saw what he did at New Mexico State. I saw the coaching staff that came to Vanderbilt at the end of the day, and you saw what he put on paper. Is this a year where you can legitimately say that he could be a dark horse contender for the Heisman Trophy?
Well, he will tell you that. He'll tell you his goal is to win a Heisman Trophy and win a national title. For me, I think it's about what's around him, right? He's got to be protected better than he was last year. There's going to have to be 2 to 3 more receivers that step up as go-to guys that can help him out. I'm fine with the running back room. I think the running back room will help him out as well. And I actually asked him today after practice. I said, you carried the ball a lot last year. You had a ton of carries. Would you like that number to go down? He didn't say yes or no, but he did say he just wants to do whatever it takes to win. So that's the type of player he is. I worry about the health, but at the end of the day, it's hard to doubt this kid. Like you mentioned last year, there were a lot of people that may not have quite known all of what Diego Pavia was about. But I think as soon as that he beat Virginia Tech, and then obviously you beat Alabama, a lot of people took notice and said, okay, this kid is legit, and he can do anything. He can beat anybody as long as Pavia is the quarterback at Vanderbilt. They can beat anybody, and it's going to be fun to see, can he elevate. He's talked a lot about his footwork in the pocket as a point of emphasis. Mentioned guys like Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. I think he does want to stay in the pocket a little bit more. But yeah, I said at SEC Media Days last week to a group that the ceiling for this team in my mind is 8-4. Just because of the schedule. You got to play a few teams that you beat last year on the road. You got to go to Virginia Tech on a Saturday night. You got to go down to Tuscaloosa, play Alabama, at South Carolina. Vandy hasn't won that game since 2007. So I think the potential is there for Pavia. I could see late in the season he's on some Heisman watch list. I mean, he was last year, but it's about finishing the season and continuing to stay healthy. That's the challenge for Vanderbilt. And I think, to me, that's still a question mark. Can you keep him upright? If you can, I think the ceiling is crazy high, but that's a really tough, that's a big if. We saw that last year. So again, if he can stay healthy, I absolutely think he can be on some Heisman watch list, but that's a big challenge for them.
I have Vanderbilt going either 6-6 or 7-5. Realistically, I mean, I look at that second half of the season for Vandy, and I'm thinking that you have an opportunity to play pretty much spoiler to a little bit on the road. I think obviously Bama's going to be a one that you could possibly play spoiler depending on where Alabama is at that point in the season. South Carolina, like you already mentioned, Tennessee, in my opinion, could play spoiler just with how much you've lost from last year. But I think realistically a 7-5 could be your ceiling. Your floor probably 3-9 or 4-8. But let's say that let's say they miss out on a bowl game. Do you think Clark Leah is gone after this year, or do they give him another year after the success they had in 24?
No, I don't think he's gone if they don't make a bowl game. I think if it's a disastrous type season and they go 3-9 or 4-8, Pavia gets hurt. I don't even see that happening, by the way. But if they have enough injuries and Pavia's out for the second half of the season per se, I think his seat gets hotter. But no, I don't think this is a type of season where Vanderbilt has to make a bowl game for Clark Lea to keep his job. Clark Lea is a Nashville guy. He loves it here, and the fans right now love him. Obviously, because of what you did last year. Not only did you beat Alabama, not only did you beat Virginia Tech, you went down to Auburn and beat Auburn, but you won your bowl game, and you have momentum coming into a season for the first time in his tenure. I think a couple of years ago, there was some momentum after a 5-7 season, and you thought you could improve off of that. But right now, you've got real, tangible success that you can lean on if you're a Vanderbilt fan. You've got Pavia back. You've got Stowers back. So, no, I think there's excitement coming into this season. I don't think there's a ton of pressure on Clark Lea anymore. I think coming into last season, there certainly was. And like I said, there were a lot of hard conversations that had to be had within the football staff, and they changed a lot of things. I think they have continuity now. I think they have a lot of depth at several positions. So, yeah, I don't think that there's any concern heading into the season. Now, you got to stay healthy. So I do think Clark Lea is just fine, and I think he's going to be here for a while, actually.
Talk to me about the defensive side of the ball. I know that the strength of this team last year was probably their front four. Talk to me about what they've done during the offseason to continue to improve.
Yeah, they brought in a lot more depth on the defensive line, brought in a guy from North Carolina, brought in a couple of guys from one guy from Southeast Missouri State, Jalen Stone, who has put on a lot of weight so far up to this point. You've got another guy from Western Michigan. So they brought in some more depth, but they had depth. They had some really quality depth at especially at the linebacker position. This linebacker room is really talented. led by Langston Patterson and Brian Longwell, a couple of local kids. You've also got Bryce Cowan in there, who has a ton of potential. I think Prince Colley, a guy that played a little bit last year, has a lot more potential. Nick Rinaldi. This is as good of a linebacker room as I've seen at Vanderbilt in a long time. On the defensive side, defensive line side, rather, you've got Miles Capers off the edge. Keanu Coate comes over from Alabama off the edge as well. They really like Issa Wataha, 6'7", 320-pounder. The kid's from Germany. He's finally really coming into his own. And Clark Lee actually said today that he's a draftable guy right now, that he could step into an NFL locker room and hold up his end of the bargain just because of his size. I mentioned Zaylen Wood earlier from MTSU. He's back healthy. That'll be a guy to watch, certainly. And you look at the secondary, they lose a couple of safeties that had been in the program for a long time, C.J. Taylor and Derrick Wright. Derrick Wright was a guy that was very long and pretty physical, but he struggled with injuries. So I look at his departure as, yeah, that's tough to replace, but I think they'll do just fine there. They brought in C.J. Hurd from FAU, who they call the Sea Snake. He's got these blonde dreadlocks that he wears. It's pretty cool. But the corner position is going to be interesting. I mentioned Marlon Jones and Mark Davis as well as guys that, look, they didn't play last year. So what are you going to get from them? They were guys that came over as transfers, as pretty highly touted guys that Vanderbilt was excited about, but they get them back this year. Martell Height is a guy that's going to be playing both ways this year. It was announced right before SEC Media Days that he'll be playing some offense as well this year. I like him a lot at that corner spot. And then the other safety spot, it's either going to be Marlon Sewell or Dante Carter, a young kid that played a little bit last year, but is still, trying to grow into his own. So it's a Clark Lee coach defense. He's handing the reins, the defensive coordinator reins, to Steve Gregory. So we'll see how that goes. Clark's handprints will still be on this defense. I don't think a ton will change. Gregory actually called the last half of the season last year on defense. So I really don't think there's a ton to worry about defensively. It's Vanderbilt, so you worry about depth and you worry about being worn down late in the season. I think that's what they're working on this time of year in fall camp, is doing things to stay healthy and be ready for a long season. So yeah, I think this was a depth-filled defense that has to continue to make plays in big spots like they did last year. This wasn't a great defense last year, but they were opportunistic and they made plays at the right time. So they've got to continue to do more of that this season. And because, look, it's not an Alabama, Georgia, Texas type defense. They don't have athletic freaks everywhere, but they've got guys that are smart and can make plays and are most of the time in the right spots. So it's a very fundamentally sound defense led by Clark Lee that, made a lot of plays last year. They got to continue to do that this year.
Billy, let's go back to the offensive side of the ball real fast. You talked about the offensive line and how much they struggled last year. Talk to me about what they've improved on from this year and what you're going to look to expect for this year. Is it better for Pavia after what you've seen just from day one?
Yeah, I mean, look, they brought in some guys that I think can make an impact. They got a 6'8", 330-pounder and Bryce Henderson from South Dakota. Speaking of South Dakota, they brought over South Dakota's offensive line coach as to be an assistant on the offensive line. So I think obviously that helped with getting Bryce Henderson to campus. You also bring in Jordan White, who PFF rated as the number one center in the country in terms of rating last season. So he's a big time player to watch. He's really athletic and can get upfield pretty quick. You also look at on the outside, Chase Mitchell, a guy that returns. They bring in Sterling Porsche from Texas Tech, Isaiah Glass from Oklahoma State. So they brought in four guys that I think can make an impact. The Oklahoma State and Texas Tech transfers, that's a rarity almost for Vanderbilt to get a couple of Power Four transfers. Obviously, Jordan White from Liberty. Chase Mitchell actually came from Liberty last season. Vanderbilt's offensive line coach right now, Chris Klanakis, was at Liberty with both of those guys a few years back before he came to Vanderbilt. So they call them the Union. They really pride themselves in running the football and creating space, and they did that a lot last year. You look at the Alabama game, that they dominated that Alabama defensive line a lot of the times against Virginia Tech as well, and certain times in the Texas game. In certain games, you would see possessions where the offensive line just manhandles the other side of the ball, but they were not able to do it consistently. There were a couple of guys that were banged up and struggled with injuries. I mentioned losing Steven Lasoya from Mississippi State. He transferred in a couple of years ago. They lose him after last year. He was a big-time leader. So yeah, your question is a good one. Can they improve and help Pavia? I think that's still to be answered, and that's going to go a long way. That offensive line is going to go a long way if they can help Pavia stay healthy and give him a little bit more time. Give him another second in the pocket to make a play that can make a big difference with how Pavia plays. So yeah, they brought in some guys and they expect them to help improve the unit, and we'll see if they can. But you're in the SEC, so you gotta buckle your chin straps and get ready to go every week.
There you go. Billy, last one for you before we let you go. What is the game that we need to look out for that could define Vanderbilt's season going forward?
I think it's Virginia Tech. It's week 2 in Blacksburg, Saturday night, Lane Stadium. It's going to be rocking, and they're going to be motivated to beat Vanderbilt. So that's going to be tough. I think that really sets the tone. If you lose that one, you're 1-1. You do have a couple of cupcakes right after that you can, that you can try to get some confidence back.
That
But
you
do have,
should win.
you should win. Yeah, you lost to Georgia State last year, so that's that's sort of an iffy game. You would think I think they beat them this year, but you never know. Who knows what Utah State comes with. Obviously, you should beat Charleston Southern. Week 2 against Virginia Tech, to me, is the tone setter of the season. You got to go play South Carolina that next game, week 3. That's tough at Williams-Brice Stadium. But like I said, after that, you do have a couple of games to hopefully give you some confidence if you do falter a little bit. But to me, it's Virginia Tech. Last year, it set the tone for them. They got it done. They felt like they had to set the tone early in the season last year to not only show themselves what they can do, but show the country what they can do and have people take notice. I think if this season goes well for Vanderbilt, they beat Virginia Tech. So I think that's a huge, huge tone setter early for this team.
Going to be a fun season for Vanderbilt going forward. We'll see if they can replicate the season they had last year. Billy Derrick over at Vandy247 joining us. Tell us about where you'll be the next couple weeks. Are you going to be in Blacksburg?
Man, I want to go. I've told a lot of people I want to go to that game, and so we'll see if we can make it happen. I've got some plans that day before, so I'm trying to find a way to get up there, but I'd love to go.
Holler at Billy Derrick at Billy Derrick 10. Follow me on X at Lucas_Hill. This has been Vanderbilt preview here on SEC Live at the Voice of College Football. Make sure you hit the like, share, and subscribe button. Thank you guys for tuning on in. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you all on the other